we put on a WFDS refresher last year for you all and decided to try it again and see what kind of feedback we got and if we get to orient you all to what was changing this year in WFDS and some of the findings from last year. Tammy Parkinson, who also works for the RD&A, is helping present. She will be watching for either your hand to come up, get a hand raise, or a question during the presentation and try to either interrupt me if it's the appropriate time or save that question to the end so we make sure we cover everybody's questions and needs and concerns. If you look at your screen, you have a place where you can do any of the above. We ask that you put in your audio pin. If you haven't yet done that, looking at your screen, just push the pound and then your pin number and then the pound again. That way we can see if we are getting some background noise or if we need to unmute somebody, it's going to be easier to figure out who to unmute and or who to mute if we're getting background noise. Here's where you raise or lower your hand if you have a question, and or you can type in a question here like we said, and then Tammy will be monitoring that as we go through the presentation to try to come up with or to be able, like I said, introduce, interject, or ask the question at the end. So we will go ahead and get started with the presentation and go from there. Yep. Go ahead, Tammy.
Just might want to mention that we are taping this. I did get it started in case folks missed it.
Okay, great, thanks. And we will try to record it. We'll record this one in the next presentation that we do, and the one that comes out the best, we'll try to get it served up on the web for folks to have the link to it as needed. So the objectives of this presentation today is to talk a little bit about risk management and how it relates to WFDS. Some of you probably have seen these slides before, but I think it's just really important to kind of think about that and frame that question. We did a review last year of the incident objectives and incident requirements on fires and talk a little bit about what our findings were to then think about how those changes or what those findings might lead to in WFDS. And then we'll talk about WFDS itself and what's important for you to know in terms of what changes to the system. Just briefly discuss fire planning and how all of the above relate to that and what you might want to think about and consider as a line officer. And then we'll have an open forum and just a time for question and answer. I'm going to apologize to any of you that have seen these slides already. We kind of reuse and recycle slides as we go through to make sure we're being consistent with our messaging as we go out and present these classes. They've been modified a little bit to present to this audience, but just realize some of it may be redundant to you as you go through. And again, don't hesitate to ask some questions at the end if we need to hop into WFDS. If we have the time at the end, we can do that as well and show you around. So no problem there. So the first thing is just that as per our policy guidance, we need to make sure that we're using opportunities to analyze and communicate and understand what we're dealing with fire and the uncertainties related to it. And it's our job to make sure that we do the best job we can in doing that in the process. So WFDS has been designed as a decision model. You see WFDS kind of running across the bottom of the page here. And if you look at the tabs, they very much follow any of the structured decision processes, whether you're looking at the most simplistic model that's kind of on the upper left that's showing that you have an issue, you frame that issue, you analyze that problem, you have a decision point where you make the decision, and then you implement and you continue to monitor it. So in the most simple form, that's kind of what WFDS is set up to do. If you look at it, we'll talk a little bit later about the risk management decision-making GTR that was published a couple years ago. It just looks at it in kind of a cyclical fashion in that you have a situation, you gain awareness of that situation, you assess it, you figure out your risk controls and what you need to do to mitigate the risk to the best possible way, and then you make a decision, you implement it, and then you continually evaluate, and you go back and forth between these steps and processes and in a continual cycle as you go through the process. So again, WFDS is designed much the same way. You have your information related to your incident, you gather information about your situation, you decide, you mitigate that risk, you decide your incident objectives and course of action, how you can mitigate that risk, you figure out the cost of that, you make a decision, and then you periodically assess that and continue to go through the system or go through the process until, through the life of the incident. And as needed, you make a new decision as you go along. So that's much like what folks are doing in the field. They're gathering that situation awareness, assessing the hazard, controlling that hazard, and making a decision as they go along. So the idea is just that everybody is doing this through the lifespan of an incident. You have your time-sensitive scale, which is your firefighters over there on the right. You have your strategic decision over there on the left. That's your WFDSS decision. These documents should feed, and this information should feed one to the other. And what you'll find as we talk about our review last summer, there's often disconnects. But in reality, what we have is a risk decision, and that information flows up and down from that individual firefighter on the ground up through the team and up through the line officer, whether a new decision is needed or vice versa. What your leader's intent is very important that that team understands it so they can relay that to the firefighters, so the folks on the ground are actually truly doing what it is you're asking them to do and what's important related to that decision. So last year we were asked by Tom Harbour, the Forest Service Fire Director, to take a look at decisions and what was going on with incident objectives. He was finding that they were very generic, and he could look one incident to another, and he couldn't determine what was the leader's intent or the agency administrator's intent on that fire. You could apply an objective from Pacific Northwest down to the southeast, and you couldn't tell where those fires were or what was relevant to the fire. So in 2014, we went out and reviewed 23 fires and looked at the incident objectives and incident requirements and kind of how that information was flowing all the way to the team. We also reviewed all the incident objectives in the WFDSS database since 2014, so that's about 6 years worth of data. And what we found was that more than 90% of the incidents were generic, maybe referred to policy, minimize fire size. They were doctrinal in nature in that they just said, you know, adhere to LCES or something to that effect. Maybe it was talk about core values or firefighters as the #1 priority. Excuse me. Or just said keep the fire small. Often they lack specificity, making it challenging to understand which one was important from one to another. An example would be keep the fire south of Wolf Ridge. So the intent there was to protect the pine plantations north of Wolf Ridge, or potentially keep the fire east of Clearwater Reservoir, when really the underlying objective was to protect Fort Collins watershed. I apologize, I've got a wicked cold, of course, right before I need to present this. So again, you can see that they were generic or didn't necessarily tell the importance of why the line officer wanted to keep that fire south of Wolf Ridge or east of Clearwater Reservoir. We also found that when fire response assets were limited, we know that the incident management team and the AAs need to choose which objective is most important, but we don't always have that ability based on those types of generic objectives. We also found that the direction differed often between the WFDSS decision, the delegation of authority, and line officers' leader's intent letter, sometimes part of the delegation of authority or an attachment, the briefing package, other documents that were provided to the team, and then just ad hoc decisions. We would find that often the same information was not being relayed through those various documents or conversations. We also found that often the IMTs were not even reading the WFDSS decision. They would come in and they said, we have a set of objectives that we use on every fire, and these are the ones we're going to use. We haven't even read WFDSS. So the disconnect there with what the leader's intent is versus what the incident management team may be implementing on the ground, that gap becomes broader and broader as people don't read the WFDSS decision. We also found that the LRMPs often have many, many objectives and requirements that were being brought in, and often they weren't even applicable to what the fire situation was, or there was too many that to make that tie to the incident objectives and requirements in the course of action was unclear or inconsistent, or that the rationale provided by the line officer didn't really provide any information about why the decision was made. We also found that, again, based on that LRMP, there were just too many strategic objectives and management requirements that were being brought in, or some of them weren't even applicable to the fire incident. We also found that spatial fire planning, where people were moving to it or could move to it, would be a benefit and would help make that transition more clear from the land and resource management plan to what was important and valuable on that incident, and how to then write the incident objectives and incident requirements. So we have some recommendations, and one of them was to improve the specificity of the incident objectives and requirements. And we know that although often referred to, we say write SMART objectives, we know that it's hard or challenging sometimes at a strategic level on a WFDSS decision. But consider the what, where, when, and why in writing those incident objectives and incident requirements. And if you just explain that, it helps the team understand what is important to you as a line officer, why it's important, where it is important, and potentially when it is important, especially if there's a time of year, a holiday, or some season that a road needs to be open or something like that. Leaving the who and how to the who being the team coming in and the how to the team so that they are the ones you're negotiating with and how they're going to do that. So once you've defined the what, where, when, and why, when the team gets there and after their incident briefing, they can help you determine if the how is acceptable. Are they looking at the tactics that you're comfortable with? We know that there's firefighter exposure and risk on every fire that we put people on. Are you comfortable with that trade-off of what we're exposing compared to what we're trying to protect? And then that dialogue can happen by clearly defining this information. So an example is keep the fire south of Cape Royal Road at Fuller Canyon. Perhaps if it was written as keep the fire south of Cape Royal Road at Fuller Canyon intersection to allow public access to Point Imperial during Memorial Day weekend. That team understands now that it's visitor access. They know that it's around the holiday weekend that it's very important, and they understand a little bit more of why they may be trying to keep that fire or that road open. And then they can evaluate whether that's feasible or not, and you can have the dialogue around that. The other one, contained portion of the fire north of Elliott Highway on the west side. Again, why is that important? So rewritten, talking about why keeping fire from hooking back around the south and west and threatening the town of Minto is very important. Again, it gives that team an idea of how extreme they may go in terms of protecting that value or protecting Minto, or the fact that what was really important to the line officer was protecting Minto, and maybe given the current fire behavior, they may need to change their tactic to protect Minto, and would have a better understanding in terms of what you're willing to risk in trying to do that. So another one is to streamline transition documents to ensure that incident objectives and incident requirements are delivered and leaders' intents are understood. The RD&A is working on potentially helping revamp the delegation of authority with some leaders' intent information in it and the briefing package to try to help people streamline that process, use the information that they have, and actually ensure that consistent information is passed along between these documents. We'll be doing some work. Tim Sexton, our supervisor or program manager, is working on some examples to bring out and show some of the line officers to maybe test this summer and or provide feedback this summer, so maybe changes can go into the Red Book next winter. We also found that our recommendation is that agency administrator, IMTs, and fire personnel should understand and align their priorities. And again, that disconnect I talked about earlier, if a WFDSS decision has one set of incident objectives and requirements, the IAP has a different set of incident objectives and requirements, and then what are the firefighters hearing to go on the ground and implement. And so trying to make sure that alignment and that consistency is there. If not your exact incident requirements and objectives coming out of WFDSS and going in the IAP, they should be very reflective of what is in the IAP, so those firefighters know, again, what the importance is on the ground. So they are truly, if they have to change their tactics on the ground, they understand the leader's intent when they do that, and they don't go out and react to a different objective or something else, and potentially either risk more to do it or take actions that aren't acceptable on that land based on the leader's intent. So again, that's that tie to make sure that that information is really flowing all the way down. And again, within the WFDSS decision, make sure those linkages are happening between the incident requirements, incident objectives, course of action, and rationale. There should be a flow in terms of how that information goes, and there should be consistency on how that information flows from one section of the WFDSS decision to the other. We also, again, found that spatially representing your information from the Land and Resource Management Plan provides not only the opportunity to get rid of some of the extraneous WFDSS information that's in there right now, but to have what is pertinent to that fire show up spatially based on how the fire perimeter is drawn in and the planning area is drawn in. And so if you spatially represent the information, you won't get extraneous information just because it was in a fire management unit. We find that now, one is folks when they were in a hurry, often to put their information to WFDSS, just copied and pasted everything out of their land and resource management plan, whether it was necessarily pertinent or not. And then you get into a fire situation where you have to make a decision and all that information is coming in a big long list. Or we find that it is pertinent to a fire situation, but it's 100 miles away on the south end of a fire management unit, and this fire is on the north end of the fire management unit, and it's not applicable to the fire. So if you could spatially represent that information prior to the fire starting, then you will only get in the information that's touched spatially by that polygon drawn for a planning area or a fire perimeter. This is an example just showing that your fire starts up there in the upper kind of left quadrant there, wants to spread to the southeast and the southwest or south-southwest. And the way they do the planning area, what would come in if it was spatially represented would be the information about the propane gas facilities, Road 38, the Red Road, the Owl's Nest, and those two green polygons. But what you wouldn't have to deal with is maybe potentially the green dot there on the bottom that talks about that section of the riparian area where you don't want to have any fire intensity, or that green dot that shows a different owl pack. I'm not sure which one this is, but it would just represent the information pertinent to that fire. You would have to deal with the water supply and the trout resource area because it covers part of that blue. But the idea is, again, and also the WUI right there in the brown on the right would show up. It would show you what is relevant to that fire start versus what was not relevant to that fire start, and you could make your decision and start prioritizing your incident objectives based on that, rather than everything just coming in a big long list that doesn't necessarily apply. That was the end of the objectives. I think, Tammy, just to break it up a little bit, we'll pause for a minute to see if there's any questions about that research or that project we did, and then we'll go on to kind of the WFDSS changes and make that tie back to the incident objectives. Do we have any questions pending, or anybody have their hand up that we want to pause for a moment?
It looks like we've got one question. Let me see. Kari Grover-Weir, hold on.
Or we can unmute her if you want.
Yeah, I just tried, and it's not, I think it's because, Kari, you need to unmute yourself because I don't have control over that. The audio pin wasn't entered. Or if you want to type it in, Kari, we can grab it that way.
Any other questions on that project from anybody while we're pausing a moment for Kari? While we're waiting a minute, the other thing to realize is that we do have, and I'll show you the website at the end, we do have some follow-up information if you're interested or you would like your staff to take a look at it on how to write better incident objectives and incident requirements, kind of how they link to other documents, what's important, how to consider the who, what, when, where, why type opportunities, and that is posted up on our web page. I would encourage you to take a look at it if you have the opportunity, or again ask your staff to take a look at it. I think it'll be a good cheat sheet for this summer in helping kind of think a little bit differently about it, and there's some examples in it that would help as you're trying to kind of sort out how to write them. So ahead,
Lisa,
yeah.
Kari's question is if there's efforts to work with the incident management teams to stress the importance of WFDSS.
Yes, we are actually going out to almost every region and touching every region and giving a presentation similar to this. Tim Sexton went to the ACIC meeting this spring, and it was very well received to talk to the teams about, one, how to provide that feedback to you as line officers if these objectives aren't clear and they need a clear understanding. Two, to make sure they are reviewing that WFDSS decision and making that tie to make sure they're supporting what you've made it as a decision. And then again, we're also going out to most of the geographic area team meetings to try to visit with the teams there as well. We've kind of divided and conquered those. So there is an effort to visit with them too. Did that answer it, Tammy?
I think so. Yep, Kari said good to hear, and I can unmute you now, Kari, so you can speak if you'd like to.
On the phone? You can hear me on the phone?
Yep, I can. Now we can, yes.
Hey, oh, yay! So yeah, that's great to hear, because that's, I think all the agency administrators and reps can agree that when we hand over the WFDSS, it gets handed over on the first day or second day, and then the incident objectives get totally changed, usually by the IMT. So it is kind of frustrating when we've spent so much time working on it.
Right, right. And I think, that connection and the findings from last year, I think, have been kind of good for all of us to see, to maybe think a little bit differently about them and how we should do them. Another question.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So this one's from Christine Brown. What's our opinion on the number of objectives that are appropriate? They're getting pushed to limit the number of objectives, which results in more vague objectives.
Right. And I think the trick there in what we're encouraging folks is, I don't know that I would say you should have 2 objectives for your fire or 2 objectives, 2 requirements for your fire. It's certainly going to depend on the number of values that you have and what's at risk with that fire. But I think what we are encouraging folks to do is not have information that's vague or policy-driven, but truly have the objectives written with regard to what's important to managing that incident. And so we didn't take a stance of you should have 2 each, 2 objectives, 2 requirements, or 10 each. I think the trick is, what we've been talking to folks about is that the more you have, the harder it is to kind of sort out which is a priority over another one. So truly make sure those objectives are what is important to managing that incident. Putting vague things in, like keep the fire small, keep cost commensurate with the values at risk, that are more kind of policy statements, or the things that are provide training opportunities for fire personnel. Those things that aren't relevant to the fire, if we can even just get those out of the decisions and get those in the leader's intent and delegation of authority memos, then at least the incident objectives and incident requirements that are written for the fire will be more applicable to the fire, and will be limited just in doing that alone, getting the extraneous information out. I think the other trick is to think about that objectives and requirements are equal in value, so to speak, in that you don't have to repeat them and have it written once as an objective, then turn around and write what the requirement is around that objective. Maybe you write it once, and so that would limit the number that we have, and where we're seeing some of the redundancy. So I don't really have a suggestion. I think we've said 3 to 5-ish, but I know you need to decide that in terms of what's important on your incident, and or based on the complexity of the incident.
So Christine, I unmuted you. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yep. She's good to go.
Okay. And again, we'll leave time at the end to go back through any questions that you might have. So as we go through WFDSS changes, if you have some more, feel free to jump in or type them in, and we'll make sure we come back around to them.
Can we do one more quick one, Lisa, before we jump out? So this one's from Kari again. It's what did the review find, and how often are folks updating the WFDSS as the fire changes? On their unit, they struggle, and IMTs are taking some of this workload, or does it stay with the forest and the district?
Okay, so we didn't look at necessarily, particularly in this review, of how often people are updating the decision, but I think the rule of thumb is that you'll update your decision if you've exceeded your planning area, or your fire situation has changed in terms of your decision no longer being valid. So perhaps you were suppressing an area of a fire that it's now gone into a wilderness that you don't need to take as active of suppression action on it. Or potentially the fire has burned into an area that wasn't even addressed in your decision. So there's not really a rule of thumb of how often to update it, but it's more, is your decision still valid? Do those objectives still stand? The responsibility for the WFDSS decision still stands as the line officer's responsibility, but often asking the team to help you update that decision, prepare for the next decision, or validate it is very important because they're the ones seeing the decision on the ground and what needs to happen. I'm going to talk towards the end where you can get help on doing that as well if the team says, oh, we don't touch WFDS, we don't have the staff to do it. There are some personnel or some staff that you can order in, which would be a WFDS tech spec or a strategic operational planner, some folks that could help you from the forest perspective if the team is unable to give you a hand with it.
Okay, thanks. One of the things, as we move towards the spatial planning, which I really like, the example that you showed where you wouldn't, for example, the bull trout issues or the fisheries issues, you wouldn't necessarily include in your first WFDS decision, but as we're specific with objectives and the fire changes, then it just seems like we're going to have to update more often than we have normally done in the past.
So I think the trick there is that you draw your planning area large enough. So in this case, you would have to deal with any bull trout or issues kind of on this north side of the stream. You wouldn't have to necessarily deal with this, whatever this green is representing, whether it's an owl pack or a certain critical habitat. But you would end up addressing this because of your planning area. So the trick, I think, is to make sure you're looking at an initial plan where you think the fire spread, looking at your fire spread probability or something to give you an indicator and trying to address that right up front. And if you can't, then that would trigger you to do another decision.
Okay.
But the spatial planning, the nice part about it is that it will help give you a sense of what it is you need to plan for, like in this example.
Okay, thank you.
So what we'll talk about next is just a little bit some of the decision changes in the WFDS program, which would be the decision editor. We're going to talk about a little bit about what is needed, a course of action slider bar, the risk and complexity analysis, how we're looking at potentially reorganizing the decision, whether we'll get that done this spring or this fall still remains to be seen. But then also talk about groups, because that's a really important one that's been new since last year that you ought to know about. So a couple things that have changed that are right up front when you first get into WFDS and get into your decision is that when you hit the situation button, you no longer have a tab that opens within WFDS, but it pops out as another window. And the nice thing about this is that as you're reviewing your decision or as you're looking at the fire, you can slide this window to the side and always be looking at a map while you're going through the incident decision. We felt that was really important because the map is what's going to give you context to what is important to your decision and where the fire is in relation to your values. Another one that's changed that is a biggie is that the validation tab no longer exists. It's now a cost tab. So when in the past when you've had to validate that your decision is stand and it is good and it stands before you start publishing the decision, that step in the process no longer exists. So a couple things right up front when you log into the system. The other thing is the decision editor is quite different than it used to be, and this is the default decision editor. It comes with a vertical menu, and you don't have to go digging for your rationale quite the same as you used to. It all kind of is up here front and center. So it opens up letting you know what it is you need to do to complete a decision. Again, most of you probably won't be doing that part of it, but when you come in, it's at least good to know if you are either writing sections of it or getting ready to review what is next before we can publish this decision. So then you slide everything over to the right and you go through the tabs just as you would have in the old decision editor, looking at, in this case, incident information. If you click again, the weather slides over, it'll give you your weather information. You slide the next bar over, you can look at modeling and what's available. You look at the next tab and you can slide over and you can look at what was done in terms of relative risk and organizational needs. And then you can look at benefits on this fire and potentially what can be gained from this fire. And that's the first time we've had an actual section. It's optional, but trying to get us to kind of maybe look a little more closely at what the benefits are out there. And you can even use a slider bar of, is there highly beneficial fire or is there low benefits based on what we have out there. And then you can look at your objectives and or add your objectives by just again sliding that, kind of like you're paging through a book. And then you get to the course of action and review that. The course of action now has a slider bar. You can see it kind of right here at the bottom. And again, this is to kind of do your overall management of the incident. You know, if you think of it from a picture perspective, do you have binoculars on it? Are you on the monitor end of strategies on this fire? Or are you over on the full suppression end, flying air tanker, using dozers, whatever methods you need to be able to suppress this fire? And that's kind of that overall strategy. And the hope there is that we pause long enough to say, okay, if our overall strategy is full suppression, yet our fire management units and the objectives, strategic objectives, and management requirements lean towards managing fire on the landscape, is there a reason why we're taking this full suppression action? Should we be thinking about it differently? And it's kind of just to make that connectedness between our land and resource management plans, our incident objectives, incident requirements, course of action, and what I've said in the rationale is important. It's just look at that flow and where I put the strategy bar. Does this all align? And have I thought about all of this? The next tab is the cost. Again, you just slide it over. Folks will put your cost in. You can still do the stratified cost index. And then down here, you get to the rationale vertical bar, which is where you used to have to kind of go digging a little bit to get your rationale. And you can go right there and put your information in. We providing kind of an outline, even for things to think about, you know, in terms of how you might even write that. You know, my decision is, and then you start talking about what that decision is for that fire. And then you go through and maybe talk about who was involved, who the cooperators were that were involved, what the values are that are concerned, why, and why they're important, how the fire might affect them, what the relative risk assessment and organizational needs indicates, what the current fire situation is, and then what any triggers might be that would instigate a new decision, like Kari was asking about. When do you make that new decision? Maybe you have some triggers right up front. If we get an east wind event forecasted, we're going to really evaluate this decision. Or if it crosses a certain area, we know we have to reevaluate this decision. So you might write that right up front in your rationale. But we really are encouraging folks to, right up front, talk about what your decision is. Often we read those rationale and we can't even really tell, are they trying to suppress this fire? What are they trying to do with it? Just by how it was written. I know some of the regions for the Forest Service are asking that the 10 questions be written in there. Another format to do it. We feel like if you answer those questions or you follow that outline, you will have answered those 10 questions. And then it's important to reference back to your decision document to go into more detail about the values at risk or the information. You can reference those other tabs and what was done to kind of explain that rationale. So that's a real new feature, a real simple way to go through it and edit the decision. It's much more straightforward than the old decisioner editor used to be, and that just came out a few weeks ago. So hopefully your folks that are doing refreshers are going through that with you all to kind of show you around in it. Once you get in there, it's very easy to essentially page through. I can almost think of it as paging through a book, page through each one of these tabs as you're reviewing your decision to publish it as a line officer. Another one we mentioned is the risk and complexity analysis. The system used to give you a team type based on how you answer these questions. When you're in the field, you don't get a team type provided to you. You look at the numbers of NAs, lows, moderates, or high, and determine what would be the best team type. What we are suggesting is that this would work the same way. So you will get this summary information, and then you'll get a bar graph that will look something similar to this that you'll evaluate to then select the team type. I apologize, I didn't realize this slide was going to be this blurry. But based on that bar graph, you'll evaluate. So in this case, most of them are lows. It kind of comes out to a type 4. You might select type 4, but you may choose to bring in, because your external influences over here is bumping up into a moderate, you may choose to bring in a few extra PIO type staff because, you know, politically, type 4 can manage it, but politically we need to make sure we're getting information out about this fire. So then you can type underneath, down at the bottom here, why you chose what you did and what you might want to do if you were going to mitigate something like the external influences, what you chose to do to do that. So this will be similar to what it'll look like. It'll be in the May release. We just wanted to let you know that that change is coming down the pike, and it should make it consistent with how the field is completing the risk and complexity analysis. Another thing that we're working on, I'm not sure that we'll get it all done or how much of it will get done by May, but we wanted to give you a heads up that we're working on it. And we've been kind of vetting this for the last year or so, is actually kind of reverse tool ordering the published decision to put your rationale and your information right up front. So of course you'd have just your overview information kind of as your executive summary, but then right up front we would show your rationale, and then followed by the incident objectives, requirements, course of action, and management action points. And then the rest of the assessment type information would follow. But if you were a person, or if you as a line officer needed to send in your decision document to the regional office or somewhere, they can really get a glimpse of that fire right up front, instead of having to dig all the way through the document towards the end to kind of find out what you're doing with that fire and what's important. Again, stay tuned on this one. We may be able to get some of it done by this spring, or some big chunks rearranged. It may not happen to this fall, but we wanted to give you a heads up if we got some of it done so that you weren't surprised by it. Another area that's very important to you as a line officer is that periodic assessment. We encourage folks to make sure that you're putting some comments in as you publish your periodic assessment. You can see here that Brent did a really good job of kind of talking about what was important to him as he validated that decision each day. And again, that's kind of your way, kind of your daily diary in a way of what was important about that decision, or why you felt that decision was still valid, or why potentially you feel a new decision needs to be made. So we kind of encourage you to spend a little time on this if you're the one that's been delegated authority to write this periodic assessment. Extended risk assessments, I want to just talk a little bit about that. There's a lot of tools out there that can help you as a line officer trying to make decisions, and information that you can gather, whether you bring in a long-term analyst to help you with it, whether one of your folks on your unit can explain these tools or can provide these products to you. And so just kind of getting your head around or realizing that these tools are out there is very important. They can not only help you analyze the risks, but they can also help you analyze the potential benefits. You know, what are the opportunities to manage fire in this area? What will this do to move our fire into more natural conditions? Or what's the probability of uncharacteristic fire behavior? Just help you frame that decision as you're writing those incident objectives and incident requirements and determining what you want to do on the ground with that fire. One of the examples is the long-term analysis, or for long-term planning, is the fire spread probability. And in this case, the line officer was able to say, okay, we have our perimeter here. Folks want to move back into their residences here where all these little red plus signs are. There's some camping that people want to get access to. What is that fire going to look like over the next while? What should we be considering in terms of these values at risk and the probability of those being impacted? So she can kind of look at where those values at risk are, how the fire may burn, and where the fire may spread. These are not fire progression map. It's not a fire progression map. This is just strictly a probability. So this red area shows in the next 2 weeks that we'll have a probability of the fire reaching this of 80%. And each concentric circle goes down from there, with the pink way out here being less than 2%. And the idea is that it's using probabilistic weather scenarios. So it's taking historic weather, and maybe I ran this for 2,000 fires over 14 days. So in 14 days, based on what has happened historically and randomly generating weather, here's the probability of those values being impacted. But again, a powerful tool for you as a line officer, if you have a value that's a ways away, and politically it's becoming a question in terms of what's going to happen with this fire, you can at least get a sense of what might happen in the next 2 weeks. It's not 100%, but it's a low probability of the fire getting there. We can continue to monitor it, or what that chance may be. And also realize that this is assuming no suppression action on the fire when this model is run. So again, just to give you an idea of, I have a cabin out there 5 miles away. What's the probability of the fire reaching that? Should we be concerned about that? So what kind of questions you might want to get answered. It also gives you, based on those plus marks out there, the communication towers, the other things that we are looking at, on this map. You can see communication towers. The red are private properties. The green are Forest Service cabins. It gives you what probability band those values fall into. So again, you can get a sense of what the values are out there from the national inventory compared to what you think might be out there on the fire. The near-term fire behavior is another excellent model to be able to give you a sense of what you might want to do with this fire. In this case, it was run to take a look at, with forecasted weather, what this fire might do, because this line officer was facing the decision of these folks wanting to come back into their property kind of in this right-hand side of the fire. Although the fire was somewhat hooked up on that north side, that's where the fire wanted to spread, and they wanted to come back into their residences. So the line officer could say, okay, in the next couple of days, this is what this fire, where this fire wants to burn with the forecasted weather. If we let you in, we're not only fighting fire in that area, but we're trying to deal with evacuations on a one-way in, one-way out road. This is what the fire's modeled to do. Now we're going to keep it closed for another 2 days till we know we've got this, that the fire's been parked a couple of days. Then we can let you in and not have to do both, worry about your safety as well as fight fire if this continues to burn that direction. This is another way that near-term fire behavior was used, and this was on the High Park fire a couple of years ago, but it was a really good example. The picture in the upper left-hand corner shows, based on a wind event that was forecasted over the next couple of days, what the fire might do. So the blue up in the upper left is day 1, the green is day 2, and the red kind of right out here is day 3. Well, based on that as a modeled spot fire, which they were having spot fires every day and having trouble capturing, it showed that it was going to get into those developments. Essentially, the developments are all the black dots. So they decided to evacuate more of the developments in advance of the fire based on this model. The lower right-hand corner shows what the fire did do the next day when those spots were not picked up on the 23rd. So again, not perfect, but it gave the line officer a sense that, hey, we need to get out in front of this with this kind of weather event coming in, get these areas evacuated ahead so we're not having to evacuate while the fire is burning. And then we can have firefighters, again, dealing with the fire versus dealing with evacuations and lots of people on roadways and that kind of things. That's, again, a forecast based on a forecast, so we can usually go out about 5 days. And so the modeling is a little more accurate to what the weather currently is doing versus the FS Pro is based on that probabilistic or that kind of weather scenario based on history. So again, a good tool just to maybe use, and again, there's folks that argue that these aren't perfect, and they're not. It depends on your modeler, but they can give you a sense that might help inform your decisions. So I talked earlier about who can help you with those decisions. The strategic operational planner can come in, and they usually have a good sense of what these models can tell you. They're also very good with dealing with operations and can help kind of tie that together and be a person that can help you with your decision making or get you the information that you need. Or a long-term analyst or geospatial analyst can run these models for you if the team doesn't have somebody, or if you don't have somebody on your local unit. Also, we have staff that are covering the phones 7 days a week. We can run these models remotely if your unit asks for them, and there's not somebody in the geographic area that can help with it. We can give a hand or support your geographic area editor in getting you these models for that decision-making process. And we can do that remotely if need be, just to give a hand, especially if we can work with somebody on the team to be able to do it. Some other things for you to think about as you go into the season. I know some folks aren't preseason anymore that are on this call, but think about that scenario and that refresher work. What can you do as a local unit to utilize a refresher to kind of discuss some of these things, the pros and cons of moving to spatial fire management planning? What does your land and resource management plan say in some of these critical areas? How would you write the incident objectives and incident requirements if you had a fire in that area? What would the course of action look like? What would be important to talk to the team about? Who would be the boundary folks you'd want to talk to? Who would be our cooperators we'd want to talk to? Can we talk to them now to find out what their concerns are around the season and or fires in certain areas? Discuss what maybe extraneous information is in WFDSS right now that you want to work to get out of there. as you work through this scenario. I'd encourage you to kind of look through a scenario either based on a past fire that you know has been complicated, or look at an area that would be hard to deal with a fire, and what could we pre-plan for? Are there some objectives we could even draft saying, okay, if we had a fire in this area, what would be really important about this? Again, talk to your resource personnel and evaluate what concerns and or benefits could be what could be happening in a certain area if a fire started there. There's some references. I talked a little bit about that earlier that can help you. There's a line officer desk reference for the Forest Service that is hosted up on the bottom, shows our web page. It's hosted up on our web page. There's also the GTR that was published 2 years ago that has a lot of really good information on how to think about decision making. Again, on our website linked to the line officer's resources are those documents for how to write good objectives and kind of tying all that information together. So some really good resources out there. If you can't find them, send me an email. I'm happy. You have my email based on your login to this webinar. I'm happy to send you the right direction or send you whatever documents you're looking for. But there's some really good information out there to take a look at. That was all of our main presentation. I'm happy to hop into WFDSS if you have questions or start entertaining questions from here. Let's see.
There's no questions at this time, Lisa. At least
Okay.
no hands raised and no questions in the queue.
Okay, we'll give it a couple more minutes. Anything folks want to go back to or again cover again, or I can hop into WFDSS and if we need to, I'll get logged in there. We would like any feedback that you have to this presentation. We're planning to put it on one more time in a couple weeks here. Any feedback that you have would be great, so we can, obviously I need to replace one of those blurry slides, but anything else that you find would have been more useful to you as a line officer, I'd appreciate it. We'll add some more slides. So just send an email to Tammy or I if you have anything.
Okay, we got one question. Where will this presentation be posted in the slides?
Last year we posted it up on the WFDSS site. We'll either post it there and or our RD&A page, and then we'll post a link. The digital version is a little bit hard to download, but we'll get it loaded up and get a link on our sites. And we may wait until after the next presentation. Again, whichever one turns out the best, we'll host up. And then the digital slides will be there as well with notes underneath in terms of kind of what our points were with each slide. So I'd say that they'll be up in the next 2 weeks.
One other question was, and this was just a recommendation, it'd be great to work through WFDSS through an example scenario if possible.
Okay. We could do that now. We could go look through that's a good point. The Gold Pan Fire, there's 2 decision examples on our website that we have put together to show folks what a good decision might look like, and that's in our references and guidance. I'm just pulling up our web page now. So there's 2 examples to help you all. Here's our briefing papers from the Objectives Project that we talked about earlier. And then down here, there's 2 fires that we took a look at. One is a real fire, the Gold Pan Fire, and we've documented kind of what was good about that decision, how it evolved, things that they did on that incident that went well, and how they documented it in WFDSS. And then the Salt Springs Fire is a fake fire that we put together, which would show kind of a type 3 decision example. That would be a more simple fire. You had a pretty quick decision this morning. You decided you were going to put it out. You gathered a little more information. You improved your objectives. And day 2, you made a decision, and by day 5 or so, it's out. So those are a couple of examples that are worth taking a look at and kind of seeing. That's a new document that was put up this spring as well. We could certainly host another call that specifically goes through a decision, if folks would be interested in that. I'd be curious about a show of hands of who would like that. We can certainly add another webinar to our repertoire this spring if that would be of benefit.
One additional question, Lisa, was will there be a generic DOA template available in the WFDSS reports?
Right now, there is a generic delegation of authority template available in WFDSS reports. We're hoping, as Tim works through this process with the line officers and the folks he's kind of vetting this idea to, we're hoping this spring still to get a delegation of authority template in that's maybe improved from what is in there right now, and then by next fall there would be an even more improved one. We're even looking as far as what parts of the briefing package could be front-loaded in the WFDSS report to be able to be used and standardized, and so you're not having to look at the 9th hour of finding that information as well. So I would say short-term, yes, you should see improvement to that delegation of authority template in the reports. Long-term, hopefully some even greater strides in bringing all that information together. I'd say we'd probably have the delegation of authority template done by, I guess, the end of the month or early May.
Okay. So we have a couple hand raises. Roselia Papito, I just unmuted you.
Some folks may have raised their hand, Tammy, because I'd asked to see a show of hands of who would like to work through a decision.
Oh, okay, there's only 3.
Yeah, I was trying to get a sense of how many folks might be interested in that. Yeah, there's 3 or 4 at one point. Okay.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
New videos posted on YouTube. We're in the process of reviewing those, but no new videos have been posted to YouTube at this point.
Actually, Tammy,
for those 6 ones, yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, the risk, right here under risk assessment, you'll see there's some videos posted and linked right here. There is some specific information related to how to do a quantitative risk assessment after you've done the initial qualitative risk assessment. So it talks a lot about the long-term risk assessment and what tools you might use to help you validate. Maybe you said fire behavior was moderate, to help look at what does moderate fire behavior look like long-term, and is that really the best way you want to quantify that? So there were some new YouTube videos up about that, but that's the main area that we've done YouTube videos for. Other than the last release, I believe Diane put together a YouTube video just showing what was in that release, which you have gotten an overview of in this presentation.
Right.
Yep. So again, this is a good site to go take a look at if you haven't looked at this. Between the references and guidance site and then the line officer specific area right here at the bottom, there's some really good information, and we try to keep that very current with any new information we have, and then reflect that on the WFDSS site as we go through.
Okay, there's one other question in there from Ian Reed, and he's asking, are we still attaching an SRA to the WFDSS decision?
I'm assuming that the SRA is a strategic risk assessment that the NEMO folks have been doing. Is that what you're meaning, Ian?
I'm trying to unmute him. Hold on. I got to find him. Yes, that's what he means.
Okay. So I think there's several schools of thought on that. My philosophy, and I think the RD&A's philosophy, is that the strategic risk assessment should be what the WFDSS document is, and it should be included in the WFDSS document as part of that documentation. We talked at the beginning of the presentation about how these risk assessment processes are the same. I'm trying to get up to that slide. And so depending on what your region's direction is, if you are required to do a separate strategic risk assessment, you can attach it to as a report, or you can reference it in your WFDSS decision. My feeling is I helped with a fire in Region 6 this spring, or this last summer, and what we did was what had been done by the NEMO team in that strategic risk assessment was put into WFDSS so that it was reflected in there and they didn't have to try to chase 2 separate documents. And then it was updated as they went through, because essentially the WFDSS decision is that strategic risk assessment. You have that issue, you assess the situation, you have right objectives for it, you determine a course of action, a cost, and you make a decision, and then you periodically assess that. So again, depending on your region's direction in terms of strategic risk assessments, our sense is that should be what WFDS is and should have in it. There shouldn't be two separate processes.
Thank you.
Trying to get to the... So if you look at what's available to you in this new decision editor and what has been available to you in WFDS in that decision, what is covered in a strategic risk assessment can be covered in those tabs. And if you need some help on that, holler, and one of us would be happy to give a hand on kind of distributing that information into the document and how to do it.
Thanks.
That's something, Tammy, I didn't have. I thought I had a slide in here, but if you are hold on a second, let me get to the right. If you are stuck and aren't sure how to get unstuck, there are a couple of 800 lines. Over here on the left, the 1866. They can help you get your password reset if you're at the 9th hour trying to publish a decision. And then we have a number down here that can help you, that we can give you a hand with those kinds of things of how to put information into a decision, running that analysis. We have somebody on call that would be happy to give you a hand if you're getting stuck on anything. Any other questions come in, Tammy, or?
No, it's no other questions and no additional hands have been raised.
Okay. Again, we appreciate you getting on. Any feedback that you can provide. I know some of you also are looking for this as documentation to show that you've gone through a line officer refresher for your agencies. Let me know, and I'm happy to send a note to whoever I need to show that you were at this class. We've done that in the past for folks. We're happy to do what we need to do to show that. The other document, if you haven't looked at it yet, and it's under line officer, right, Tammy, is the line officer refresher information?
Yeah.
Let's see, right here. This is a new document that we just put up, kind of showing things that you could focus on as a line officer for refresher information and training material. Again, that's on our web page under that line officer's links. But as you are trying to get your refresher, or if you're trying to meet the requirements for the line officer refresher, this is kind of lining out what you might do and work with your fire management officer or fire staff to get done. Okay, we're right at an hour. If we don't have any more questions, we'll end it here. And again, your feedback would be appreciated. For the next session, will be very similar to this, other than any changes that you see or that we found as we've gone through with questions. We might tweak it a little bit, but thank you for being on, and call us if you have any questions or concerns or needs. We're happy to help, and we've got folks available to do that. So have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.